Between 1819 and 1823, famous Spanish artist Francisco Goya created 14 paintings in the later years of his life. These paintings depicted nightmarish imagery and bleak outlooks on humanity itself. Around this time, Goya isolated himself in a farmhouse, the dread of old age and the fear of madness fueling him. This could be linked to the fact that he had contracted an undiagnosed illness that made him deaf. These works were painted on his walls, only to be transported onto canvas years later after his death. These 14 pieces were titled by historians as the Black Paintings, due to the fact that black was the main theme in color and also story. One of the most well-known of this collection is Saturn devouring his son, which depicts the Greek mythology titan Saturn doing, well, exactly that. Goya had taken this grand story and made it into a more dark and disturbing variation, where Saturn is depicted as a paranoid madman who fears the day his crown will be taken away from him, so his only solution is to consume his child, in hopes he will never be dethroned. Other examples of dark paintings include Caravaggio's depiction of Judith beheading Holofernes, made between 1589 and 1599. The biblical tale of the hero Judith. After seducing the general, she begins to decapitate him. Caravaggio wanted to focus on the most dramatic part, the action of the murder. From the fear on Holofernes' face to the dynamic stage that the artist had created in this work is a prime example of how subject matter like this can be effective and draw the viewer's eye. There's also the life and work of Vincent van Gogh, who historically suffered from psychological episodes and suffered greatly until he died via suicide at age 37. Although many of his works are well known to this day, he was considered a failure in his era. Thankfully, he has been seen as a misunderstood genius, and his work ranged from eerie portraits to macabre masterpieces. Now, why exactly am I giving this short brief on art history if this video is talking about edgy art? Well, it's because I want people to understand that this sort of style is not just as tongue-in-cheek as many communities like to claim. If anything, the style is more widespread than I think anyone realizes. When it comes to the term edgy, the actual definition is not as clear as one might think. One definition states it's tense, nervous, or irritable, or at the forefront of a trend, experimental or avant-garde. But then on sites like the Online Slang Dictionary, it states socially dangerous or daring, intellectually provocative, tending to induce unease or stress in viewers, especially used to describe artistic and intellectual work. There's probably a bunch more out there that explain even further, but the main issue is that this word seems to be more towards intense feeling and or different and in your face. It can be argued that a lot of artwork mentioned in the beginning is that type of style that fall under that definition, but the question is, what makes this work actually stand by the term and art itself just being a mere joke? The world around us has changed in a lot of ways, and the internet has provided us with terms to coin when we see something that's either good or bad, mainly bad for the sake of humor in this case. I know I personally have called myself edgy for a few years as a joke, because the art and media I enjoy is centered around the edgy umbrella, though I've honestly started to question if I should even be using that term because, I think it's used more as a way to discredit rather than to celebrate. Being edgy has pretty much become a meme that mainly goes towards the dumber side of this genre, obviously garnering to young kids who discovered MS Paint and making characters that were dark and mysterious. At least that's what I hope to think, cause I for sure was in that category. But regardless, it's all a joke, isn't it? All in good fun. Well, I personally don't really see it that way. I know there's been a way more open-minded environment when it comes to the genre of art compared to years prior. The more we burn the 2010s, the better. I can't help but feel there's a community that lashes out against media that contains this edgier subject matter. You can probably see where this is going. I was originally just going to talk about just this, but I feel like this is more of an example of what I'm talking about. It's probably no surprise to anyone that I am a fan of the animated pilot and upcoming series Has Been Hotel. Yes, you have permission to laugh at me and my Alistair plushie. I have no shame. I shouldn't have to be ashamed in liking this concept of a show. It takes place in hell, the color palette mainly stays on the warmer side with reds and pinks, the characters are demons that range from stylized to monstrous, as well as having profanity-filled humor that can be crude, yes, but what do you expect? They are in hell. I've heard stories about people being doxxed, rumors being spread about the production, Discord servers being raided, and detractors straight up making assumptions about how the story is written. If you are not a fan of this pilot, have your own problems with it, or it's just not your cup of tea, that's perfectly fine. People have their opinions. However, if you are a person who literally goes out of their way to go after those for doing nothing but enjoying this type of cartoon, you are pathetic. I say this because I get really discouraged as a writer when I see people reacting to things like this. If anything, I praise VivziePop and her talented crew for putting so much heart and soul into this world. It really gives people like me and many others a small string of hope that there's an audience that can enjoy much edgier forms of art. Even if there is, a sudden backlash for animation and art for this nature, it's inspirational, which is a very powerful thing in the art world. There's this brilliant video made by In Praise of the Shadows, where he discusses the history of Zdzisław Blajinski, a Polish artist who is well known for creating nightmarish paintings. I won't go into too much detail since I think everyone should really watch that video. The biggest reason why I want to mention this is that this man's work defined the modern heavy metal genre, which is relevant to my discussion, because, well, what's edgier than heavy metal music? And where could anyone be able to get such influence without inspiration? There's also a really fantastic video made by Solar Sands, where he discusses the secret, more darker paintings made by famous child book author and illustrator Dr. Seuss. He goes over his whole timeline about how he started off with his illustrations and how his imagination, while yes, was more made for children, but he also had a side to him that was more creative, that had more adult subject matter. This is important because, really, every artist should be able to explore this type of edgier style, I suppose, in their art career. And maybe sometimes they just want to do that, because that's just what they love. It's a variety of things. To me, being inspired by a form of art is really the key element of what makes edgy art the way it is. I've covered how painters in art history had created nightmare-inducing images based on what they were going through emotionally, or wanting to tell a story that has a dramatic and in-your-face, with blood being the key factor. I think it's pretty relatable for a lot of artists that we take in whatever influence that conveys a feeling, and we use that as a way to explore and improve on our own art journeys. For me, I discovered that my biggest inspirations were in the form of horror movies, comic books, and metal music. From the colors to the worlds these pieces of media bring, it really shaped the direction I want to explore more as I grow as an artist. I honestly love hearing about people's main source of inspiration, whether for art, fashion, makeup, or just profiles on social media. Because even though it's easy to label people as edgy or weeaboos, what have you, there's this sort of fascinating take on what people can create from it, if they choose to do so. One of the biggest gripes about being an artist who focuses on edgier things is the idea of using black and red in a color palette. I have lost how many times I've been questioned for this or judged by my character designs involving these colors for a while. What bothers me is that media has created characters that have these exact colors, and yet no one really seems to bother in critiquing that. I even found an article talking about the use of dark and light colors in comics, which is one of my inspirations and main source of reference when I illustrate. In all fairness, I could be overthinking it. I'm sure there's a lot of people who either love or hate this type of coloring who aren't as harsh and demanding. It might just be because people just didn't really know, or they just wanted to be in on the joke that red and black equals edgelord because Shadow the Hedgehog. Frankly, I think there's a good and bad way to use these colors effectively, along with, just letting people explore creative freedoms with fair critique without forcing them into a bubble because you just happen to not like that. So what can be said overall about my view on edgy art? I think there's more to it than people think. I think there's just this idea that edgy artists get put in a secluded little bubble just for the sake of jokes. Now, don't get me wrong, I can take a joke. I make fun of myself all the time for the stuff I've drawn and written that range into that supposed stereotype. Will that ever slow me down? Never. It makes me happy. At the end of the day, I will draw this type of stuff because it makes me happy. And I know tons of people who feel the same way. Critique, opinion, and open minds help people. But if you are the few that just want to shit on those for their passions because some meme told you to, then I honestly feel sorry for you. At the end of the day, it's not as black and white as people want to perceive it to be. Art like this has existed through ages upon ages of art history, and people are just drawn to different walks of life when it comes to that. Inspiration and influence is a huge thing when it comes to this type of media. Some people are just really into this type of thing. I know I am, and I follow artists that also are into it too. It's all just for the sake of wanting to do stuff your way, and you have your own unique twist on things, whether it's color, style, technique, anything. And I like to believe that there are people who just understand this and are willing to just, be open-minded, but considering what I have seen when it comes to animation and cartoons specifically, I honestly just get so frustrated by it. What does that say about comic books? What does that say about TV shows? What does that just say about just creators and artists in general who just want to do this because that's just what they love? Does that make them bad? Does that make them evil? Does that make them just cringy edgelords? I don't think so. If anything, it just seems like people are trying to grip onto this one thing because somebody on the internet told you to. I honestly really like to indulge myself in this type of media, and well, it may not be everybody's cup of tea, but it's what makes me happy. And I think everybody can at least attest to that.